Hello, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, class. So today we're going to go back over what I think Wittgenstein's main point is. I said I think there's just one key point really that he's making in these central passages of the investigations, and I'm just going to go back over what I think that main point is. I want to start out by looking at his comments on the role that images, mental pictures, might play in your understanding of language. And then there are two parts next. One is there's a way of thinking of what it is to be understanding a word, what it is to be understanding language. There is a matter of knowing interpretations for the words you describe, knowing how the words you understand are to be interpreted. And that's what he thinks is the wrong picture. And the right picture of an understanding of the word has to do with something to do with custom or practice, which is where we kind of petered out last time. Something about this notion of custom is very central, and I want to go back over that positive account. What I think the main puzzles are in understanding his positive account. So, and one other thing, if you've been looking at these passages from the investigations, they're very rich and they're full of detailed, interesting points. And if at any point as I'm working through today, you want to raise some question about any particular paragraph that struck you or sentence that struck you from the investigations, do feel free to raise it if you think it's to the point here. Okay, so understanding and images. There are two general questions he's addressing. One is, how does it happen that we all use words in the same way as one another? This is what I was talking about last time when I said, what keeps us together in our use of language? And there are a couple of aspects to this, that we use words in the same way as one another. One is, we apply the same words to the same objects. I mean, sometimes there are cases where we might violently disagree. You might say, this is perfectly fair. I say, no, that's not what I'd call fair. Or you say, this is a democracy. I say, well, I never thought of that as what a democracy would involve. But these cases where we disagree over how we're going to apply a word, they really seem to depend in the vast majority of cases where we agree on what color words to apply, where we all agree that this is a blackboard, that this is a screen, that these simple basic uses of words we all agree on, we apply just the same words to just the same objects. And the second aspect of it is we draw just the same conclusions from a particular words applying to an object. If we both agree it's dangerous, that the word dangerous applies to it, we'll draw the same conclusions as to how to react to it. If we both agree that the thing is a cube, we'll have the same expectations as to whether or not it will roll, for example. If we agree it's an egg, then we'll both agree that regular humans would find it edible. So we apply the same words to the same objects, and we draw the same conclusions from a particular word applying to an object. And those two things together constitute us using words in pretty much the same way as one another. And the question is, how does that happen? How does that come about that we utter the same sounds in reaction to the same objects? We draw the same conclusions from a particular words applying to it. What is the explanation of that? Is it just an unexplained coincidence? I actually think Wittgenstein's own view is yes, it is an unexplained coincidence. There is no explanation to be given of this. And if you disagree with that, you really have to say, what is doing it then? If there is an explanation for why this happens, what is it? The second question he's addressing is, how can there be such a thing as standards of right and wrong in our applying words? When we apply the same words to the same objects, we might be getting it right, we might be getting it wrong, it can be true or false. When we draw these conclusions, we might be drawing the right conclusions, we might be drawing the wrong conclusions. How is it that there are standards of right and wrong for our use of words? And it's very natural to think those two questions are connected. What keeps us all together in our use of words is that we have the same standards of right and wrong for the use of the words. That's how come we apply the same words to the same objects. If you think it's not a coincidence that we apply the same words to the same objects, what else could it be except that we know what the standards of right and wrong are? And when you think about it, it's very compelling, really, to think there is such a thing as understanding a word. You sometimes see things called it pays to increase your word power, and there are you learn new words, and you learn the definition of a new word. You sit up all night with a dictionary. You make it a habit never to encounter a word you don't know the meaning of without finding out what it means. So you learn words one by one. When you're learning a language, the way you do it is you acquire a vocabulary. And you know what is meant by the word on particular occasions when it's used. So that knowledge of what the word means, we all have the same thing there. That knowledge of what the word means is what explains the existence of standards of rightness and wrongness in use of the word. And it explains what keeps us together, that knowledge of what the word means. That's the picture Wittgenstein's attacking. And after all, for some words, you do learn what they mean by learning a dictionary definition. You learn a definition of one word in terms of some other words. But for that to work, the words that are used in the definition must be words that you already understand. And how do you understand them? Well, your understanding of those words might be by further definitions. But at some point, this process has got to come to an end with some words that you don't understand by means of definitions, some words that are not actually defined. And what does your understanding of them consist in? What sets the standards of rightness or wrongness for the use of words that are not defined? And how does it happen that we all agree in applying those words that are not defined in just the same cases? Well, the answer that Wittgenstein really considers at length is that when you understand a word like cube, say, that you don't learn necessarily by having a definition of it. You understand it by having a picture before your mind. You have a mental image of the cube. If it's a color word like red or blue, you understand it by having a mental sample, a mental image of the color. Maybe a drawing of a mental drawing of a cube. I mean, you say, well, the way we all understand the word cube is we have something like this. Something like this. Look at that. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm damned if I can see what it is. Anyway, you see what I mean? Something like that comes before your mind. You say, this is not a verbal definition, so there are no words here I need to define. But this is what a cube is. If you didn't understand what a cube, and I did something like that, there's a line missing there somewhere, but I can't see where it is. No, is that all right? Okay. Anyway, thank you. Right. But you said, well, what's a cube? And I drew something. You say, well, okay, now I got it. I didn't need to define it verbally. So maybe this picture of the cube, that's what you need to understand. That's what gives you an understanding of words that's not by definitions. And if you have the same kind of thing in your mind as I do, that will keep us together when we're applying the word in particular cases. So the use of the word is going to be right if the object you're applying it to fits the picture. If I say, this is a cube, then that would be all right if it fitted the picture. Doesn't fit the picture, so we say that's not a cube. But what does it mean, fits the picture? Here's Wittgenstein. I see a picture. It represents an old man walking up a steep path, leaning on a stick. Well, how? I mean, in what way? You've got a pictorial image here. You've got a collection of patches of paint on the canvas. In what sense does that represent an old man walking uphill? Might it not have looked just the same if he had been sliding downhill in that position? So you see the idea. He's just on roller skates or something and just sliding gradually downhill backwards. It would look just the same. The picture would be just the same. And he says, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe on Mars, old men are typically mounted on skateboards and to the amusement of the general public, taken up hills and let go. Maybe on Mars that's what they do. Maybe it works for everybody. And a Martian would naturally describe the picture like that, that this is an old man sliding backwards down a hill. And then he says, well, I don't need to explain why we do not describe it so. It's not clear to me why he doesn't need to explain that. It does seem to me kind of puzzling when you put it like that. Why is it we read it one way and not the other? But the thing is, the point is, you could have interpreted those patches on the canvas differently. You could have the very same picture in your mind and interpret it now one way, now another. So a picture like this can be applied in many, many different ways. You could apply this, you could take this picture and say, well, actually, that does apply here, that does apply there. Can I wave this about for a second? Whose is this? Okay, can I wave it about for a second? Okay, and if you take this, right, you might say, this drawing doesn't apply. Look, that's a cube. I mean, this isn't like that. Or you might say, yeah, this does apply like that. This does apply to that. Right? I mean, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of room for maneuver in what you do with the picture. Does it apply to the projector? Well, you might say, so long as the good majority of it can be brought into some kind of correspondence with a good majority of this, that's what you do with the picture. What you do with the picture is really up to you. You need to know how the picture can be interpreted. You can't just take it that the picture carries its own interpretation with it. So if you don't understand the word at all, the picture is not going to determine the right way to interpret the word. It says if you've got a picture of a cube like that, it suggests a certain use to us. If someone doesn't know the meaning of the word cube, and I do that, that might help them get the hang of it. It might be like, I mean, another thing that might help you get the hang of it is if you've got a clip round the ear. You know, if you've got a bang in the side of the head, that might knock some sense into you, and you think, okay, now I get it. And similarly, this might do something like that to you. It might do something to your brain, so you think, yeah, now I know how to use the word. But the picture itself doesn't dictate what the right way to use the word. It would be possible for you to use that picture in lots and lots of different ways. You could use it so it applies to the projector. You could use it so it applies to that recorder. Or you might not. It's up to you. There are different interpretations you could give to the picture. So the meaning of the word can't be defined in terms of a picture. There's something else that's got to be supplied, namely the use that you make of the picture. What is essential is to see that the same thing can come before our minds when we hear the word, and the application can still be different. You could be understanding the word cube to mean any kind of 8-sided figure. How many sides? 6-sided figure. You could be using the word cube to mean any kind of six-sided figure. I could be using the word cube in the regular way. We could have exactly the same picture before our minds. And has the word the same meaning in both cases? I think we shall say not. Well, obviously not. So the picture can't be what fixes when it's right or wrong to use the word. That can't be how it's done. It can't be done by a definition, and it can't be done by having a picture coming before your mind. So whatever's going on when we use words that are not actually defined terms, like colour words or words like cube and so on, it can't be that we're trying to keep faith with the picture. It's not that this specifies how you should use the word, because lots of different ways of using the words are consistent with that specification. And he says, well, suppose you say it's not just the cube, but the method of projection that comes before our mind. So maybe what you have is you got a picture of a cube, but you also got a picture of the way of using that picture. So what you have is, say, two cubes connected by lines of projection. So you might have something like this. There you go. Two cubes. Look at that. Two cubes. Yes, as described. And lines of projection. So it goes something like this. Maybe. I don't know. There you go. Now you understand, right? Maybe you have that come before your mind. So you get the picture, but you also get pictorial instructions on how to use the picture come before your mind. But does this really get me any further? Can't I now imagine different applications of that scheme too? And in fact, you get just the same problem as before. You have that picture come before your mind. I have that picture come before my mind. We might completely disagree in which objects the word cube applies to, even though we have just the same picture in front of our minds. The picture can't itself specify how we're to use the term. So it can't set standards of right and wrong, and it can't be what makes it the case that you and I agree on applying the word here and there. The pictures that come before our mind are not actually relevant to our understanding of the word at all. So our understanding of words can't be explained in terms of our knowledge of definitions, and it can't be explained in these pictorial terms. Wittgenstein's conclusion is, forget all this stuff. Forget all this stuff. None of that is even relevant to language use. All that there is the use. The fundamental thing is the use. Nothing explains that we all use the word in the same way. And the puzzle is, how can there be such a thing as getting it right or wrong when you use the word? And there's no definition, no picture. We just do use the word. So what defines right and wrong here in your use of words? We've removed anything that could be defining right or wrong in your use of words. And if you ask, how come you and I agree in whether we apply the word cube or the word white or whatever to the same objects, we don't have anything in our minds that is explaining why we use the words in the same way. So how is it happening? What could there be there? There doesn't seem to be anything that could be explaining it. So that's his point about images. Are we happy with that? Are we happy both that I've explained Wittgenstein's point correctly and that this is a forcible point? Okay? Okay? Onwards. So now I want to go over. I see my list of topics has changed from the first slide for reasons that escape me. But what I want to do now is go over interpretations. The puzzle is we don't have a standard that we each individually use to determine whether it's right to apply a word in a particular case. It's not that you have a standard in your mind, I have a standard in your mind, and when we apply the word, when you say, is that white, you check the standard and you say, so does this thing meet the standard for the word white to apply? We're not explaining it like that. So if there aren't any standards for the words to apply or not, how can there be going right and wrong? There isn't any standard. But how can there be right or wrong if there are no standards? It seems to be just the same thing, having a standard in your mind and having right or wrong. And his basic point is that it's a mistake to think that if you're going to find standards of right or wrong, you have to look inside the mind of the individual. You have to look outside at the customs or practices in which the individual's use of the sign is located. So the key trick is to stop looking inside the mind and look out at the context. The natural idea is when you're increasing your word power, when you're learning new words, when you get a new word into your vocabulary, there's this, the understanding, the knowledge of meaning is something in your psychology, is something going on in your mind. And then when you apply the word, that's grasping the rule. And when you apply the word, you're just trying to keep faith with the rule. And the point is there is no such inner state. There couldn't be such an inner state. Couldn't be definitions, couldn't be pictures, and there's nothing else it could be. All that could be inside your mind is a way of defining it in terms of other words. That's what he calls an interpretation. And the interpretation, the definition of the word in terms of other words, itself needs to be understood. And then at the end of the day, you can't have just definitions of signs in terms of other signs. Ultimately, you've got to be understanding signs without definitions. This is what where we came to last time. How can a rule show me what to do at this point? Well, whatever I do is on some interpretation in accord with the rule. Should we say that? That I've ultimately got some picture, some definition in my head, and anything can be made out to be in accordance with it. And what he says is, any interpretation still hangs in the air. Any explanation of the meaning of the sign, whether it's in terms of other signs or in terms of a mental image, that still needs to be interpreted. It can't support the definition, the ascription of one meaning or other to the word. So interpretations by themselves don't determine meanings. At the bottom of meaning, the foundational parts of meaning, don't have to do with definitions or mental pictures at all. And then he gives this example of signposts. What is the expression of a rule? Say a signpost. You say, the signpost says Dublin 2 miles. You say, what's that got to do with my actions? And he says, well, maybe all there is this. The natural thing is to think, you look at the signpost, and then you have a mental picture, or you have a definition, an explanation of what signposts mean, and you use that to interpret the signpost. And his answer is no, you've just been trained to react to that sign in a particular way. And then you do react in that way. That's all that happens. It says Dublin 2 miles, you want to get to Dublin, so you walk that way. If you looked at the sign, it says Dublin 2 miles, you want to get to Dublin, and you start digging a trench. You start going through the earth, or you walk in a quite different direction. You've got it wrong. but not because you're not interpreting it in accordance with what's in your mind. Your reaction is just wrong. He says, well, that's only just explaining, you look at this and that causes you to react in that way. Or you hear a word and that causes you to react in a particular way. And he says, but that doesn't tell you what getting it right or wrong, going by the sign, consists in. And he says, no, it's not that we haven't yet said anything about what going by the sign consists in, is rather that there is a regular use of signposts. There is a custom of using signposts. But what's a custom? Certainly, he's saying this at least, that if you're going to have right or wrong in your use of a word, there has to be a custom of using the sign. And the existence of the custom isn't a matter of everybody mentally associating the right thing, the same thing, with the sign. So the puzzle about the custom, about the notion of custom, is what is it to be using a sign in accord with a custom? What does it mean? We know what it does. Once there is a custom, that's going to mean that there is such a thing as using the sign in such a way you get it right or wrong. But what does it take for there to be a custom of using the sign? I think that's the main puzzle about Wittgenstein's interpretative picture. What is this thing, custom? It sounds familiar, but what is required? We know what's not required. This mental association, there's something in your head. But what is required if it's not that? Plain sailing so far? Okay, so what's a custom? Actually, I think it's extremely difficult to see what a custom can be. The main point here, the negative point, that is not a matter of there being something in your head, it's not a matter of a definition, it's not a matter of a mental picture. That seems to me extremely forceful and extremely important. It is very difficult to see what can be going on with language, how it is happening that we all use words in the same way. How can that be? And how can there be standards of right and wrong? And these are genuinely baffling questions once you grasp this negative point about it's not images and it's not interpretations. Are we on board with that? I mean, can you put up your hand if you think there's a pretty straightforward answer here that I'm just missing? Can you put up your hand if you think this is genuinely baffling? Okay. So I would say that was about a third. Okay. Well, if it's not genuinely baffling and there isn't an obvious answer, what is left? An unobvious but available answer. Is that a bad question? Okay. Okay, so he thinks it's a custom, but what is that? What does it take for the? I mean, for example, could I set up my own custom? Or are you raising a question, or you're raising a question? Yeah.
My question is: does he regard the picture, the definition, and the use as the only three possibilities?
Yeah, there's the definition, there's the picture. These are two ways of setting up standards of right and wrong and what keeps us together. Yeah, and then there's the use. Then they're just staying with the use and saying there's no more going on than the use, in which case it's hard to see what keeps us together in our use, and is baffling how there can be standards of right and wrong. Right? Those are the three things. Yeah.
Somewhere elsewhere in the literature rule out the idea that reality plays any role?
Reality?
Yeah, I mean, just the actual objects.
Well,
Where you're
mhm.
referring to? I mean,
um,
that seems the obvious answer to me. That
very good. Here. Okay. I think he does take it that those three things. I think it's fair to say he takes it that those three things are the available alternatives. Yeah. Certainly, that's the way I'm interpreting them. Right. I do think that's right. He does take it that these are the available alternatives. I think with the what you said was the object, right? Now, in a way, that was how we began in this class, right? That we want there to be standards of truth and falsity for sentences, and the way you get standards of truth and falsity for sentences is by giving references to the singular terms. Right? You get the sentence, Sally is tall. That can be right or wrong. How come? The first thing you have to do is get a reference associated with the sign Sally. Yeah. So you're right. If we got a reference associated with Sally, and we know what it takes for something to be tall, then we're going to have standards of right and wrong. Yeah. But how does the sign Sally on its own is just a dead sign? How does the sign Sally get hooked up to the object? He's taking it through a definition, an interpretation, and that might be provided by, for example, a set of descriptions. Yeah. Or it might be provided by pointing to Sally and saying, okay, so if I'm going to explain to you who Sally is, what the word Sally stands for, I say, lo, Sally, or here Sally, or meet Sally. Right? But what does that give you? It gives you a perception of Sally. What do you get by way of your understanding of the sign? You get an image of Sally. That's all it can be giving you. I mean, how is the sign getting connected to the object? Either by description or by some perceptual link. But that is what he's addressing. That doesn't add a fresh possibility. You see what I mean? Yeah. It's not, if you can get the sign associated with the object, then you're home. I agree with that. But how does the sign get associated with the object? That's the question. Your understanding of the sign has to be what hooks it up to the thing. And we don't know how that can be happening.
But it seems like he wants to say that understanding has nothing to do with the object at all. It's just like mimicking what other people do with words.
Yeah, this whole picture of, very good. He is attacking the whole way I've been setting up problems during this whole class, right? He is saying that way of thinking of it, the sign gets associated with an object, and it does so through your understanding of the sign. And then the puzzles we've been discussing with Frege and Russell and Kripke and so on are all about how your understanding of the sign could get you hooked up to the object. And he's saying, none of that works. The only way that could be working is through a definition, as with descriptions, or through a picture, as with a perceptual link. And that can't be what sets up the standards of right and wrong. Something else is setting up the standards of right and wrong. So it's not done by connecting the signs to objects at all. That's just a mistake. Yeah. Yep.
Why can't it be that the mental representation or picture, what have you, plus certain facts about human brains just settle this whole story?
Okay. Well, let's take this slow. So just to help me think about that idea. Okay. So you're saying it's certain. There's the mental picture, right? So there's the cube. So you get a mental picture of a cube. And we agree, right, that if you just have that on its own, that could be interpreted in lots of different ways. Yeah. And then you're going to add in something about the brain.
Yeah.
This being the brain. Something like that. Right. Okay, but what about the brain? What's it going to be about the brain?
Well, I mean, let's just say there are a limited number of different ways that you and my brain can both employ this picture of a cube.
Right.
And we can use other bits of our language to settle which of those we're talking about. Come to some sort of agreement.
Okay, but now, can I wave this about a bit more? Okay, thanks. So suppose we've got the word cube, right? And the question is, does it apply to this? We agree the picture doesn't do it, right? But there's something about the brain hooks the word cube up to this. Yeah. So when I have that picture before my mind, something about the brain makes me, in conjunction with that picture, makes me apply the word cube to this. Right. But how could that constitute there being a standard of right or wrong? The stuff about my brain tells me is that I'm now going to say that's a cube. But if I do that, I'd actually be wrong. That's just the kind of mistake I might make. Maybe my brain is programmed, so I just make mistakes. I mean, the truth is, I actually have one of those brains that is so programmed that I make mistakes. Right? I don't always get it right. Yeah? So suppose this is just the kind of case that trips me up. I'm going to say this is a cube and it's not actually. So how come there's a standard of right and wrong whereby I'm getting this wrong? All my brain did was ensure that I made a mistake. You see what I mean?
I don't think that there's those kinds of standards of right and wrong maybe for the cube case. So maybe in other cases there would be. But never
Right.
I'm
Okay.
just trying to say why I think that the sign gets hooked up with the object, not necessarily how it gives standards of right and wrong.
Yeah.
But
No, I think it is I mean, the reason I'm taking time on it, I think that is an idea worth pursuing. But the obvious problem is that it's just a roundabout way. All it gives you is a roundabout way of restating the basic problem. It doesn't show you how standards of right and wrong are set up in the first place. Yeah? 'Cause it just tells you your brain is going to make you do this or that. I mean, because you might think, well, my brain's got encoded in it instructions on how the word should be used. But if you ask what those instructions are, you just run right back into the initial problem, which is those instructions are either a dictionary definition of the word cube, in which case you've got to ask, well, what are the primitive signs for the brain? Where are the signs that the brain understands, but not in terms of definitions or sets of instructions? And how do right and wrong happen for them? And also, what keeps us together? I mean, after all, you know, there's a lot of individual variation in brains. People can have quite different brains, but still understand the words in the same way.
But the facts about the brain could keep us together even without giving us the standards of right and wrong that we want.
Right. We might have similar brains, right, and therefore use the word cube in similar ways. Yeah. But suppose you take Martians, whose brains, suppose the Martians visit, right? The Martians have brains made of jello, but they're very good. You know, they're very smart, despite that. They could still understand the language in just the same way we do. They could learn our language. It would be no good to say, and they would be kept together with us in their use of the signs. It might turn out, say, that Scots people have brains made of quite different stuff to the rest of humanity. Yeah, it would explain a lot, but the basic use of English would still be quite the same. It'd still be kept together. You see what I mean? It wouldn't show that we were whatever's keeping us together. It doesn't seem to be that. Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry, you were going to raise a question. Were you just stretching? I thought you went like that, but okay, 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 yeah.
I'm confused. Why doesn't the picture of the cube show that that's not a cube? I mean, that's pretty obvious. It's not a cube. It has one side that's really long and the other two sides are pretty short. That side, that seems pretty regular. If it were drawn correctly, it would be regular and would not be so misbent.
Right. So if you don't like this example, let me give another one that makes the same point, I think. Suppose I take triangle, right? So I'm going to explain triangle, right? And I draw this, right? Well, are the sides are the same or not?
Well, it depends on what kind of triangle.
I was just talking about a triangle.
There are many types.
Right, but that's one, right? So if I'm going to do an image of a triangle, should the sides be the same or should they be different? I should have many images. Okay, that's ingenious, right? But however many images I do, right? I mean, you see why he says there are going to have to be many images, right? I mean, the trap I was setting up, I mean, it's not a very fancy trap. It was a simple trap, but the trap I was setting up was, you either say the sides here are the same, in which case, by your reasoning, all the sides should have to be, of any triangle would have to be the same, which is the wrong answer, or I make them different, in which case the sides of any triangle I set up would have to be different, right? So then you say, no, I've got to have many kinds of triangle, but really, once you put it like that, there are endlessly many different kinds of triangle, right? Really infinitely many once you start. Because after all, these sides here are quite a bit longer than the base, but not all that much longer. I mean, what about a triangle like this? If you see what I mean, yeah? Or what about a triangle like this? Right? So for your understanding of the word triangle, you're going to need just infinitely many images, yeah? And you're still not going to quite know what the answer is, because after all, it might be just geometrical shape that you're explaining, yeah? And just giving some examples of geometrical shapes, yeah? Or plane figure. And so with this, with a cube, if I was explaining the meaning of the sign of a word like a six-sided figure, I could give that as an example. There's a perfectly good example of a six-sided figure. It unquestionably is a six-sided figure. And then you ask me, yeah, but do the sides have to be the same? Well, no. But then should I get the same problem for this? Do you see what I mean? I didn't do that because I went to the triangle because it's easier for me to draw all the different triangles. But if I was just explaining six-sided figure, I might just give that, or I might give one with different size sides. But then you get the same kind of puzzle generated. None of these images is going to do the work. Yeah, it depends how you use the image, and what Wittgenstein's saying about that is. The picture of the cube suggests a certain use to you, but it doesn't determine what the right use is. It is not like a contract. It's more like a kind of nudge in the ribs that says, try this, and this will suggest something to you, but it doesn't define right and wrong. Okay, that's the argument anyway, but come back if okay, yep.
If all we do when we're using words is just mimicking the way other people use
It's just what, sorry?
It's just mimicking the way other people use them.
Yes, right.
How can he account for the invention of new terminology? Like when
Yeah.
invent some new device, like a television. there was no
Absolutely.
device that was before.
Yeah, how could it be happening? Yeah, I agree the most basic phenomena of language seem very difficult to understand. On his account, the key has got to be this notion of custom. But if you ask, what is a custom? Then I just want to blast through what the positive account here is. That is a really basic question you're asking. I mean, you've got a word like television that it doesn't seem to be defined. It's not, I don't know a definition of television. I mean, I think I know what it is, all right, but I don't know the definition. He thinks what you need is a custom, and he thinks, well, what is a custom? So all I want to do just in the last couple of minutes is there are these things you can figure out from the text that are simple, definite things about what a custom is. A custom at least requires many cases in which the word is used. It mustn't be that you use the word television just once, and that gives you a custom. It's got to happen many times for it to constitute a custom. And he says, well, is what we call obeying a rule in the use of language something that would be possible for only one man to do, and to do only once in his life? And if you're going to have a word that you can go right or wrong, say things that are true or false, and it has a meaning, could that be something that you do just once? It just pops into your head, you say, stimp! That is a stimp. And the topic is never mentioned again, right? Does that make any sense? And he says, no, that does not make sense. It couldn't be that someone said, that is a stimp, and they got it right or wrong, what they said was true or false, but no one ever used that word again. That is a note on the grammar of the expression to obey a rule. He means, if you just think about what it is to obey a rule, you'll see that this is impossible. It's not possible that there should have been only one occasion on which someone obeyed a rule. And it's not possible that there should have been only one occasion on which a report was made, an order given, or understood. I think what he means there is, it couldn't happen that only once in the history of the community did anyone ever give an order. For there to be such a thing as an order, it's like a signpost. There has to be this. It has to happen many times that orders are given. Now, since following a rule is not an interpretation, obeying a rule, using the word in accord with a rule, bringing your use of a word under a rule is a practice. Practice he seems to use interchangeably with custom. And to think that you're actually obeying the rule is not the same thing as obeying the rule. So you can always be deviating from the rule, even though you're doing your best to conform to it. So when you say something's a cube or something's white, you can know perfectly well what the rule is. You can be trying to conform to the rule, but making a mistake. But the existence of the rule isn't a matter of some interpretation or image in your mind. So it's not possible to obey a rule privately. I think what he means is it's not possible for you to just set up rules on your own and say, I'm going to use language this way, because you have no way of saying what the way would be. You can't do it on your own. The only way you have of saying what the way would be is to give definitions or to produce a mental image. But on your own, these are all the resources you'd have, and you can't do it. You can't define words in those terms. If you did, you just obliterate the contrast between using the word and getting it right and using the word and getting it wrong. But the problem here for this approach to getting it right or wrong on your use of language is, suppose you've got many cases. That's all we got so far of what a custom is. There are many cases in which people apply the word. But how can that be what makes it the case that there are standards of right or wrong for using the word? I can't do it on my own. I mean, there are things like lifting the table that I couldn't do on my own, but if a bunch of people do it, they can all do it together. So I can't do it on my own, set up standards of right and wrong for the use of language. But how does having other people around help? If none of us can do it on our own, is it like lifting a heavy weight? How can the existence of many people mean that we can set up standards for right and wrong, whereas one person couldn't do it on their own? I think a basic point here is whatever a custom is, the existence of a custom just can't be the mere existence of many cases in which we apply a word. There's got to be something more to it than that. And I think that if you remember, there was that quote from Cavell about shared senses of humour, shared senses of what is appropriate and what is not, of what is a joke, what a request. There's some notion of form of life in Wittgenstein, the same set of shared reactions to the phenomena around us, the same sense of, the same kinds of social behaviour that we have. There's some kind of background or context like that into which all these many cases of applying a word have to be fitting, so that we have to be all finding it natural to use the word in a particular way. And part of what Cavell called our whirl of organism, something like that is the picture. What exactly it means, I find it very difficult to interpret. But that's as far as I've got for today. And we'll continue with this on Wednesday. Okay, thanks.